get started, so we won't hold them back.
Okay, praise the Lord. So we're talking about eventually getting the children of Israel through to the Western Isles, but tonight I thought we'd look at the actual people, because there's an old saying we used to say that if you took the miracles out of the Bible, you wouldn't have much of a Bible. Well, I've got another saying: if you took the children of Israel out of the Bible, you wouldn't have much of a Bible. Particularly the Old Testament, pretty well everything is to do with the children of Israel, these 12 sons of Jacob. So last week we talked about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and now we're going to talk about Jacob's 12 sons in particular. Although the first bit we're going to read includes one daughter called Dinah. And it was a time when a young man, Shechem, a local lad, wanted to marry, but took advantage of this girl, Dinah. And we're going to pick it up where they tricked them by circumcising them. And then when they were, as it says here, saw, they took advantage of that. We're going to start reading in Genesis chapter 34. And what I'm doing is I'm going to look at some of the stories to do with the 12 tribes and get a bit of a picture of who these tribes, what they were like, and who the people were, what sort of things they were important to them. So Genesis 34, verse 25, it came to pass on the third day when they were saw that two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brethren or brothers, took each man his sword, and came upon the city boldly and slew all the males. They slew Hamor and Shechem his son, Shechem was the boy involved, with the edge of the sword, and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went out. And the sons of Jacob came upon the slain and spoiled the city. So this is all of the sons now, because they had defiled their sister. They took their sheep and their oxen and their asses, and that which was in the city, and that which was in the field, and all their wealth, and all their little ones, and their wives took they captive, and spoiled even all that was in the house. And Jacob said to Simeon and to Levi, "You have troubled me to make me stink among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanite and the Perizzite, and I being a few, I being few in number, they shall gather themselves together against me and slay me, and I shall be destroyed, and I and my house." I'll read the last verse in a minute. So they sort of took it into their own hand, and they obviously showed no mercy at all and slew everybody around them. And Jacob was quite convinced of the fact that his name then would be, his household would be named, but actually the reverse happened. Because of their aggressive attitude, they then became people to be avoided and not to try to go to war with them. So really the opposite will happen to Jacob. But what we do see is Jacob was upset with the Levi and Simeon. By the way, they had the same mother, Leah. So when it says they were brethren, they really were 100% brethren. The last verse says, and they said, should he deal, that's Shechem, should he deal with our sister as with an harlot? He took advantage of her. So we get a bit of a picture of these 12 lads working together. And often, I remember with me and my brother, we used to do a lot of fighting like brothers do until we had a common enemy, and then we'd lock horns against our common enemy. And that's what happened here. And they really gives us an insight to what these men could be like. Now let's go to chapter 35, next chapter, and we'll read a little bit more about them. And we'll start reading in verse 22 and read to verse 26. And I might get Colin Waldridge, if he wouldn't mind. You can come back on, Colin, and read these verses for me.
26 to where?
26 to 22 to 26.
Yep. But it came to pass when Israel dwelt in that land that Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel heard it. Now the sons of Jacob were 12. The sons of Leah, Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, and Simeon and Levi and Judah and Issachar and Zebulun. You just gave me all the hard names. The sons of Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin, and the sons of Bilhah, Rachel's handmaid, Dan and Naphtali. And the sons of Zilpah, Leah's handmaid, Gad and Asher. These are the sons of Jacob, which were born to him in Paddan Aram.
So there's a good little list, so we understand who the mothers were in there. It must have been at times when there was a bit of a division among the 12 brothers on who was connected to which woman. And in particular, we just see with Levi and Simeon combining together, the main ones that went and destroyed the household of Shechem. And we also see here that there's the two maids that had two sons. Because Leah and Rachel were you might say, the true wives, and the others were just handmaidens. We see a little example of this. Let's go to chapter 37. I'll just read it. Chapter 37. Canaan. And these are the generations of Jacob. Joseph being 17 years old, big number in the Bible, by the way, safety and security 17. Won't digress too much into that now. Was feeding the flock with his brethren, 4 of his brethren, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah, and with the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives or concubines. And Joseph brought his father their evil report. We don't have no more than that. All we know is that those 4, for some reason, stood out among and maybe saying things they shouldn't be saying. And their younger brother called Joseph, he squealed on them. And nobody likes a whistleblower. But Joseph did the right thing, as he always did, and that made him stand out of that. They basically hated him for doing that. And then the next verse says, and Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. Very famous part of the Old Testament. But what did that do? It only made all the brothers hate him. And when you have a favorite in the family, the ones that are not a favorite really do jack up. So without going through the story of Joseph, which I think most of us know like the back of our hand, so we know that, so I won't go through that tonight, but we know it's a big part of the Old Testament, big part of the book of Genesis, dealing with Joseph being sold into Egypt and all that happened to. And so this is the story of picking on one of the tribes, Judah, where his wife had died, and he had 3 sons and 1 daughter-in-law, Tamar, and how the first son had died. I won't go into the details. Second son had died, and under the Old Testament law, she should have been given to the younger son. The age doesn't seem to come into it. And he didn't, because he thought, well, my other two children died, and if I give the third one to Tamar, then he might die too. And so he withheld. And Tamar knew her rights, and as we know, she tricked him and played the harlot. And we'll just pick it up in verse 22, Genesis 38, and verse 22. When she got a pledge from Judah, a signet, a ring, and a bracelet, and he sent back a lamb, which obviously was valuable to this lady. And when they came back to try and find her, Tamar had vanished. She got what she wanted. She conceived by her father-in-law. We'll just read from verse 22. Who will I pick on? Pick on anybody, I suppose. What about Ellie? You all right for that, Ellie? You're on mute. So I just want you to read chapter 38, verse 22 to verse 26.
And he returned to Judah and said, I cannot find her, and also the men of the place, that there was no harlot in this place. And Judah said, let her take it to her, lest we be shamed. Behold, I sent the kid, and thou hast not found her. And it came to pass about 3 months after that it was told Judah, saying, Tamar, thy daughter-in-law, hath played the harlot, and also, behold, she is with child by whoredom. And Judah said, bring her forth, and let her be burnt. When she was brought forth, she sent to her father-in-law, saying, by the man whose these are, I am with child. And she said, discern, I pray thee, whose are these the signet and bracelets and staff? And Judah acknowledged them and said, she hath been more righteous than I, because that I gave her not to Shelah my son, and he knew her again no more.
So some of the stories in the Bible are rather descriptive, but it really is an important part of the Word of God, where the other 3 sons end up not being big players in the house of Judah. It is the children that were born unto Tamar that become the big players in the house of Judah. We'll just read verse 27 to verse 30, and I might pick on Wendy. Would Wendy read those for me? You're on mute. Still on mute, Wendy.
That's it.
There we
Right.
go. You got it. You got it.
Now, what am I reading? Sorry,
Chapter 38. No, that's fine. Chapter
20.
38, verse 27 to 30.
27 to 30.
You came to pass in, come on.
And it came to pass in the time of her travail that, behold, twins were in her womb. And it came to pass when she travailed that the one put out his hand, and the midwife took and bound upon his hand a scarlet thread, saying, this came out first. And it came to pass as he drew back his hand, behold, broken forth. This breach be upon thee. Therefore his name was called Phares. And afterwards came out his brother that had the scarlet thread upon his hand, and his name was called Sarah.
This becomes a big part of the story of the throne of David.
Yeah.
And also other incidences in the Bible as well. So it's a weird story. The whole thing's a weird story about one about to be born and then wasn't, the other one was born. The scarlet thread ends up playing a big part. And later on, we're going to look particularly at Ireland, where we're mainly based tonight, and the red hand of Ulster. And there's a lot of connection there with this son of Zara, and later on with Phares. Phares, of course, is the one that the line of King David goes through and the line of Jesus Christ goes through. So, as I said, these stories all have significance. They're not put there in detail just because they're a funny little story. They were all very important. Let's go to chapter 48. There's many, many other stories there, but just picking on the ones that really affect the future. and to particularly do with the 10 tribes later on, the 2 tribes. And now we're going to talk about particularly Ephraim and Manasseh. Now, the birthright always fascinates me. The birthright, which was the blessing of Abraham through to Isaac, through to Jacob, and through to the 12 sons, it never quite went to the right person. It's supposed to always go to the firstborn. Now, Abraham got the original blessing. His firstborn was Ishmael, but instead of the blessing going to Ishmael, it went to Isaac. Now, Isaac had twins, Esau and Jacob, and Esau was the firstborn. Should have gone through to Esau. We know that Jacob tricked him, and the birthright went through to Jacob. Was the firstborn of the 12. He should have received the birthright, and he didn't. We read one of his father's concubines and defiled, as the Bible puts it, defiled the bed of his father. And as a result of that defiling, sort of the act of immorality, he was rejected from getting the birthright, even though he was the eldest of the 12 sons. And it then passed through to Joseph, who didn't go to the second or third or fourth, right down to the 11th son, Joseph, and Benjamin being the last son. And because of Joseph, you don't really need to explain why God chose Joseph. Joseph was such an amazing guy and a perfect man, and saved all his household, saved his dad, saved his brothers from starvation and so on. Even though they'd sold him into captivity, the natural mind says he should have hated them, but he didn't hate them, and he forgave them, and they had trouble coming to grips with that. But so you see the birthright, instead of going to Reuben, it went to Joseph. And now we're going to read about how it still didn't go to the firstborn. And we're going to read here in chapter 38. And I'll get on Colin Farrar, if you wouldn't mind. You could read for me. Chapter 48. And we're going to start reading in verse 8. And we're going to read through to verse 16. Quite a bit of reading, but Colin's up to it, I'm sure. You're on mute, Colin.
Okay. Verse 8, and Israel beheld Joseph's sons and said, who are these? And Joseph said unto his father, they are my sons whom God hath given me in this place. And he said, bring them, I pray thee, unto me, and I will bless them. Now the eyes of Israel were dim for age, so that he could not see. And he brought them near unto him, and he kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said unto Joseph, I have not thought to see thy face, and lo, God hath showed me also thy seed. And Joseph brought them out from between his knees, and he bowed himself with his face to the earth. And Joseph took them both, Ephraim in his right hand towards Israel's left hand, and Manasseh in his left hand towards Israel's right hand, and brought them near unto him. And Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it upon Ephraim's head, who was the younger, and his left hand upon Manasseh's head, guiding his hands wittingly, for Manasseh was the firstborn. And he blessed Joseph and said, God before whom my father Abraham and Isaac did walk, the God which fed me all my life long unto this day, the angel which redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads, and let my name be named on them, and the name of my father Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow unto a multitude in the midst of the earth.
So we see here that there's a transfer of the birthright. Not that Manasseh did anything wrong. The other cases, there's sort of some reasoning behind why it was the one that got it. It's just God's will in this particular case, where he decided, even though he was the one that instituted that the firstborn should get the blessing, it was Ephraim that got the blessing. So he crossed his hands, and even though Joseph had set it up that it should be the right hand blessing Manasseh and the left hand blessing Ephraim, He crossed his hands. Now, once it, verse 16 in particular is the blessing transferred. Once it was said, it couldn't be reversed. So even though Joseph tried to interfere, you can sort of see his point of view. Oh, you got it wrong. You got it wrong, Dad. He didn't get it wrong. You go, I know what I'm doing. I'm doing it wittingly. I'm aware of what I'm doing. I might be blind, but I haven't lost all my marbles. I know what I'm doing here. And particularly at the end of verse 16, where it says, let my name be on them and the name of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, and of course himself, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of them. So that blessing had gone through to Ephraim. It couldn't be changed. But even though we see Joseph tried to change it. Vince, would you be able to read the next part? Vince, unmute yourself.
Yeah,
Thank
sorry,
you, Vince.
which part?
Verse 17 to verse 22.
Okay, and when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand upon the head of Ephraim, he displeased him, and he held up his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head unto Manasseh's head. And Joseph said unto his father, not so, my father, for this is the firstborn. Put thy right hand upon his head. And his father refused and said, I know it, my son, I know it. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. But truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations. And he blessed them that day, saying, in thee shall Israel bless, saying, God make thee as Ephraim and as Manasseh. And he set Ephraim before Manasseh. And Israel said unto Joseph, behold, I die, but God shall be with you, and bring you again unto the land of your fathers. Moreover, I have given to thee one portion above thy brethren, which I took out of the hand of the Amorite with my sword and my bow.
So it's one of the great stories in the Old Testament, and now and again people try to prove that the only blessing that came through from Abraham was Christianity. And by the way, I'm not greatly against that, because Christianity is such an important thing, and the seed of Abraham being through Christ. But there's parts of the Old Testament you would have to ignore, like particularly the fact that Jesus Christ was a descendant through Phares, the son of Judah, and the tribe of Judah had nothing to do with Ephraim and Manasseh. So these blessings are separate to that. They're still a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now we see here that, without going into so much detail tonight, I think we'll do that on the last time we do this. We'll talk quite a lot about Ephraim representing Britain and the Isles of the West, which is we're talking about, and then Manasseh representing America, one being a multitude of a commonwealth of nations, and the other being a great nation with perfect description of the United States and of America and of England. So a very important part of the Old Testament. Now we're going to go to the next chapter, chapter 49, where we have a breakdown of the 12 tribes and how that each one was blessed and sometimes cursed, or pointed out that he wasn't happy with them by Jacob. And he gathers his 12 sons, including Ephraim and Manasseh, although in this particular case, just singles out Joseph, representing those two tribes. By the other point to note, at the end of the chapter, well, chapter 48, moreover, given to the one portion above thy brethren, Joseph ended up being two tribes, and rightly so. He was greatly blessed of the Lord. Funny how the numbers sort of work out in the end. You end up with 13 tribes, but Levi ends up being the priesthood tribe, has no inheritance. So later on, you've still got the 12 that had inheritance. Ephraim and Manasseh have their own right, their own tribes and places in Israel, and Levi had no inheritance. It was the priesthood. So it sort of still ended up being 12 plus 1, a little bit different to what it is here. So Jacob, we'll start reading in verse 1 of the next chapter. And Jacob called unto his sons and said, gather yourselves together, that I may tell you that which shall befall you in the last days. So it's talking about right through, I believe, until the second coming. Gather yourselves together, and hear you, sons of Jacob, and hearken unto Israel your father. A little bit confusing in some of the stories we've already read. Of course, Jacob's name was changed to Israel, but now and again it refers to him as Jacob, and now and again it refers to him as Israel. But we know that also refers to the 12 tribes, so it's a little bit confusing at times. So, same person. So here we go with Reuben. We read about why Reuben got refused. Reuben, thou art my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength, and the excellency of dignity. There's a lot of points here that I can't elaborate on tonight. We might just grab one or two as we go through. And the excellency of power. And then it says, unstable as water, thou shalt not excel, because thou wentest up under thy father's bed, meaning when he had that relationship with Bilhah. And then defiled thou it, and you went up to my couch. So rejected from getting the birthright. Now we talk about Simeon and Levi. Now this passage here is when we read about how they went in and destroyed the house of Shechem and rescued their sister Dinah and had no mercy. And that's what comes out here. So he puts the two together just like they did on that occasion. Simeon and Levi were brethren. You had the same mother, Leah. And the instruments of cruelty are in their habitations. O my soul, come not thou unto their secret, unto their assembly, mine honour. Be not thou united. For in their anger they slew a man. They did more than that, didn't they? And in their self-will they digged down a wall. Cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel. And I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. Funny way, what he's saying here is that you were united and you were natural brothers, complete, same father, same mother, but punishment for being that brutal, I'm going to divide you. So that Levi had to be separated, not only from his brother Simeon, but from all the became the Levitical tribe. So he said, you're not going to go on like this close relationship. Levi is going to be totally separate, and you will actually have to join with the other brothers. I dare say is what I get out of that. Let's read a little bit more. And Judah, thou art he whom thy brethren shall praise. Thy hand shall be in the neck of thine enemies. Thy father's children shall bow down before thee. So what we're doing here, we're dealing with the royal tribe of Judah. Later on, King David and all that. We'll talk about that maybe next week in particular, the throne of David. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, thou art gone up. Thou stooped down. He couched as a lion, and as an old lion, who shall raise him up? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh, a reference to Jesus Christ, until Shiloh come, and unto him shall the gathering of the people be. Finding his foal unto the vine, and his ass's colt unto the choice vine. He washed his garments in wine, and his clothes in the blood of grapes. And his eyes were red with wine, and his teeth were white as milk. Now look, there's 20 things in that you could talk about, but I haven't got time tonight. The main thing we'll dwell upon is that Judah became the royal, the scepter, the lion, represented by the lion, later on the lion and the unicorn, and all of it. It's a great story in the Bible. We'll deal particularly with it next week. But so two of these brothers stand out from the other 12. One is Judah, and of course the other is Joseph. They're the two ones that really, he says quite a lot to them, and they're going to be big players. One was the royal tribe, one was the birthright tribe. Okay. I might just get Pastor Martin, if you wouldn't mind reading.
Will do.
Verse 13 to verse 18.
Okay, Zebulun shall dwell at the haven of the sea, and he shall be a haven for ships, and his borders shall be unto Zidon. Issachar is a strong as couching down between two burdens. And he saw that the rest was good, and the land that it was pleasant, and bowed his shoulders to bear, and became a servant unto tribute. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, an adder in the path that biteth the horse's heels, so that the rider shall fall backwards. I have waited for thy salvation, O Lord.
So, not commenting on everything there, just that Zebulun and Dan ended up, when they had their possession in the land of Israel, they ended up right up the top, up near Lebanon. And later on, when the Assyrians came down and first conquered them, they were the first ones to fall. So, Lord by the sea, they were seafarers like the Phoenicians. Dan also was involved in shipping. And then particularly talking about Dan. Now, Dan really ended up being the most wicked of all the tribes, because it adopted paganism and idol worship very early on, and it never ever gave it up. Now and again, when it says that they would turn back to the Lord, maybe like under Josiah or Hezekiah or people like that. Looks like Dan never did. Everybody else did, but nobody in Dan ever turned back, and they, in a sense, were punished by the Lord because of that. Talks about biting the heel of the horse and falling back. It caused Israel to fall backwards, is the thought there. And it was not good for the children of Israel. Okay, I'll read verse 19. And Gad, a troop shall come overcome him, and he shall overcome at last. Out of Asher his bread shall be fat, and he shall yield royal dainty. Naphtali is a hind let loose, who giveth goodly words. Look, as I said, you can go on commenting on each one. One comment I will make about Asher is that when the Anna came in and blessed Jesus in the temple, after Simeon had already blessed Jesus, she was of the tribe of Asher. Maybe that's the greatest claim for the tribe of Asher. She represented the 10 tribes, and Simeon represented the 2 tribes, but the blessing of Jesus. So, Joseph. Make it Helen. I want you to read from 22 down to 27.
Joseph is a fruitful bough, even a fruitful bough by a well, whose branches run over the wall. The archers have sorely grieved him and shot at him and hated him. But his bow abode in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. From thence is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. Even by the God of thy father, who shall help thee, and by the Almighty, who shall bless thee with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lieth under, blessings of the breast and of the womb. The blessings of thy father have prevailed above the blessings of my progenitors unto the utmost bound of the everlasting hills. They shall be on the head of Joseph, and on the crown of the head of him that was separate from his brethren. Benjamin shall raven as a wolf. In the morning he shall devour the prey, and at night he shall divide the spoil.
Talking about Joseph in particular, and again, it hasn't said that, but you've got to put in Ephraim and Manasseh, because that's who he's talking about, and how that one would represent a multitude of nations, the other would be a great nation. And when you think there that all the word blessing comes up again and again and again, God was very happy with Joseph, and why not? And all the great blessings that would be upon Ephraim and Manasseh. As I said, that's really in the background there. What else? Oh, just interesting, it mentions the stone in brackets in verse 24. From thence is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. Wow. What is that? I'm not 100% sure I know what that means. We talk a lot about the stone of destiny, but I dare say we more connect that to the tribe of Judah and the royal tribe. So What it does say here is that Joseph would represent security. He would be the shepherd. The shepherd looks after sheep. He would be the shepherd of the stone of Israel. Jesus Christ is another reference to the stone of Israel. What we do know is that Joseph was going to be a wonderful blessing unto them. Now, people like Brother Nick Ashton, Brother Nick Ashton, have done a lot more research than I have on maybe somewhere, some places that some of these 12 tribes ended up, maybe through Europe and England and so on. The one that I always think of when I read the story of Benjamin is the Vikings. And when you read verse about Benjamin, it sounds like, I think they even had it sometimes on their great sails, or on the front of their boats, the emblem of the wolf. So I'll read it again. Benjamin shall raven as a wolf. In the morning he shall devour the prey, and at night he shall divide the spoil. Is there any better description of the Vikings than that? So who knows? So there you are. There's the 12 tribes. Just a couple of verses to finish off. We'll just read verse 28. Just don't jump to there. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is that their father spake unto them, and blessed them, everyone according to his blessing, he blessed them. And just jump down to the last verse, verse 33. There's more there, but just picking on the main points tonight. Verse 33, and when Jacob had made an end of, or Israel, Jacob had made an end of commanding his sons, he gathered up his feet into the bed and yielded up the ghost and was gathered unto his people. So the next chapter is all about what happened to the end of their stay in the land of Egypt. Exodus, of course, the book of Exodus is the great story, starting with Moses quite a long time after the end of the book of Genesis, of taking these 12 tribes. They've grown in quite a multitude. I haven't got time tonight, but some of the figures that were translated seem to be maybe not quite translated properly, and there is a story behind that. Some people talked about moving millions from the land of Egypt. It certainly wasn't millions. They went across the Red Sea in one night. You can imagine trying to move a whole million, even 1 million people in one night. So some of the figures are not maybe as high as they should be. But it's a great multitude of people that left under Moses. In 1495, they left and went towards Palestine. A great story of wandering in the wilderness, and all part of God's plan, and not having faith to go in early on, and then later on, took another 40 years, and they finally go in under Joshua. And Moses doesn't quite make it. Moses represents the law in the Old Testament. He brought the law in for the children of Israel. There was no law up until then, mainly people's conscience. And circumcision was already there from Abraham, part of the law, but the rest all came in under Moses, and the 12 tribes had to learn to live by all those commandments. Read the book of Leviticus, the massive commandment, book of Numbers and Deuteronomy. They've got quite a few as well, and they had to live under that. So eventually, in 1455 BC, we have the Battle of Jericho, and where the children of Israel start to go into their promised land. It took 40 years later. So, as I said, the Old Testament deals with these people in great detail. Book after book, chapter after chapter, is dealing with these tribes. And it really is unimaginable that God would just later on forget all about them. We're into so much trouble to explain everything to do with them. So when you go through all the books of the Old Testament, again and again, the focal point are these people. What we do know, we can look at that a lot, maybe on the last night, is eventually they were scattered throughout the planet. We read about Ishmael, how he would dwell amongst his brethren. The Arab people never immigrated. The Philistines never immigrated. Esau, Edom, you can go through all of the different Moab, Ammonites and Moabites. They mainly went on dwelling right where they were. But the children of Israel, and as had been promised by God that they would become a multitude of nations and a great nation, they immigrated, and it was mainly northwest towards Germany and Scandinavia and Britain and so on. And all migrations, no matter who, whether you believe in the Bible or not, everybody seems to think came from the east to the west. All the Celts and the Picts and Scots and so on, you go through them all. How are we going on time? Just turn to First Chronicles. First Chronicles. Oops, I've got First Chronicles chapter 5. As I said, I think next week we'll deal with the kings of Israel, and particularly the house of Judah. And so much of the Old Testament is dealing with them. The other thing that did happen, of course, after Joshua eventually took the land, and I think I've got to do that in a minute, that he then died, and then a lot of the elders that had been there with him kept the children on track, and then they lapsed into what's the time of the book of Judges. You have judges from all the different tribes. Later on, the leader, as the Lord said it would be Judah. But to start off with, like Dan, Samson was from the tribe of Dan. You're going through picking different judges from different tribes. And it was all a bit muddy, really. Now and again they were good, and most of the time they were bad, and then a judge would come up and rescue them, and after a while he would die and they go back into being bad. An amazing book, the book of Judges. Then the last couple of chapters is all about Benjamin and Dan and so on, and worshipping idols and all the troubles there. And then finally we get Samson comes on, Samuel should I say, comes on the scene, and he rescues the situation. First of all, with King Saul, who didn't work out too good, and then King David. That's sort of the basic story through until we talk about the tribes later on in history. But here in First Chronicles, in chapter 5, there's 2 verses, and that's in verse 1 and verse 2. Now the sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, for he was the firstborn, but for as much as he defiled his father's bed, his birthright was given unto the sons of Joseph, the son of Israel, so Ephraim, Manasseh. And the genealogy is not to be reckoned after the birthright, to the firstborn. It says, for Judah prevailed above his brethren. So pick these two out like I did before, Joseph and Judah. Judah prevailed above his brethren, or the other brothers, and of him came the chief ruler, but the birthright was Joseph. So it splits those two. One is the birthright, one is the royal house, the royal house, and that that he would rule over the others. It's interesting when you jump through to King David. King Saul reigned for 40 years, and he was over the whole 12 tribes. But when King David became king, they weren't happy to have him rule over all of them. And he was only over his own tribe. For the first 7 years of his reign, he was only over the tribe of Judah. Then eventually, for the next 33 years, he was over the whole 12 tribes. So very clear here, Ephraim, Manasseh, they took or Ephraim in particular, took the birthright, and Judah represented the king of David. Again, to think that that doesn't go right through to the second coming is crazy. All of these things are something he set up that was going to happen not just for a couple of years, but would be there forever. The birthright would be there, and the royal house of Judah would be there. We'll finish off with the book of Joshua in chapter 23. So, a little bit sad about Moses. He got angry. And when the Lord told him to just talk to the rock the second time, he got angry with the children of Israel and he lost his cool. So I'm going to get Joshua 23. And he You can hear the anger in his voice. Do I have to keep doing this sort of thing? And he ends up beating the rock. So I'm still fiddling around. With a stick twice, hits it twice. And God said, because you've done that, Moses, you have not sanctified me in the sight of the children of Israel. You've not stuck to my word. I never told you to beat the rock. I never told you to get angry. Just do what I said. The end result is you will not enter into the promised land. We know towards the end that he, quite sad, really, begged God that he might go in. And God said no. And you might think, why was it so harsh? Because the law was harsh. You break the law in one spot, you're guilty of all. And Moses represented the law. So the closest he got was on top of a mountain, Mount Nebo, overlooking the Jordan Valley towards Jericho, towards Jerusalem, way in the distance. That's as close as he got. He died there. And as I said, in some way symbolic, that if you live under the law, you won't get into the promised land. It's not the way in. The way in is by faith and by conversion under Jesus Christ. So let's just read this in Joshua 23 and verse 1 to 4. Click on somebody. Peter. Hello, Peter and family. How are you? Good to see you. I'm wondering if you might read from verse 1 to 4 of Joshua 23.
1 to 4. And it came to pass a long time after that the Lord had given rest unto Israel from all their enemies round about, that Joshua waxed old and strict in age. And Joshua called for all Israel, and for their elders, and for their heads, and for their judges, and for their officers, and said unto them, I am old and strict in age, and you have seen all that the Lord your God hath done unto all these nations because of you. For the Lord your God is he that hath fought for you. Behold, I have divided unto you by lot these nations that remain, to be an inheritance for your tribes, from Jordan with all the nations that I have cut off, even unto the great sea westward.
So I guess the main point I'm making here is that eventually they got into the promised land, and the land was divided up. Half the tribe of Manasseh, tribe of Gad, who was the other one? Reuben and Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh stayed on the east side of the River Jordan, towards the hills of Moab and Ammon. They took possession there. And on the other side, the western side of the River Jordan, the West Bank, as I dare say, it's part of it, the other tribes and half the tribe of Manasseh ended up there. Manasseh, by the way, it's interesting, representing America later on, was by far had the most land of any of the tribes. They've been the biggest. The Yanks always like to be the biggest, and they had in the land there. And when the Assyrians came down back in later on in 745, Manasseh was one of the first ones to be taken captive. Why? Because they're up the top, along with Zebulun and others that I mentioned tonight. So the main point is we've got it. We've come in. We've conquered the land. You can settle down and rest, but don't get involved with the locals. Don't get involved with idol worship, which of course they didn't always listen to. But for a while, there was, I dare say, great peace. Towards the end of the life of Joshua, as Joshua said at the end, as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. You do what you're going to do. You want to worship the idols that your fathers worship way back there, well, that's up to you. But as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord. And all the elders at the time said, God forbid that we should worship other idols. And for quite a few decades, I dare say, maybe a century or so, they walked with the Lord. And then they all died out, and all the trouble started, and God had to raise up judges, one after the other, and delivered them. So we just finished tonight, verse 14 of the same chapter. So the words of Joshua, verse 14. I'll finish by reading this. And behold, this day I'm going the way of the earth, and you know in all your hearts, in all your souls, that not one thing hath failed of all the good things which the Lord your God spake concerning you. All are come to pass unto you, and not one thing hath failed thereof. What a verse! We haven't got that verse underlined in our Bible. We should have. I'm going to read it again. Behold, this day I am going the way of the earth, and ye know in your hearts and in all your souls, right through and through you, that not one thing hath failed of all the good things which the Lord your God spake concerning you. Man, what a statement. Now all are come to pass unto you, and not one thing hath failed thereof. Therefore it shall come to pass that as all good things are come upon you, which the Lord your God promised you, so shall the Lord bring upon you all evil things until he've destroyed you from off this good land which the Lord your God hath given you. When ye have transgressed the covenant of the Lord your God, which he commanded you, and have gone and served other gods, and bowed yourself to them, then shall the anger of the Lord be kindled against you, and ye shall perish quickly from off the good land which he hath given unto you. And that's really the main story of thrust of our story, talking about the isles of the west. He said, one day, if you become involved in it, I'll drive you off the land of Palestine. And one scripture talks about it resting like a Sabbath, and they've gone, and all their corruption's gone with them. We know later on that happened in 2 or 3 different times in their history. But first of all, he said, right now, just recognize the fact that you're just serving a good God, and he's kept his promise to every one of you. And all the people said, amen.
Oh.